The dust cloud rose from the empty corral like a mockery of everything Katherine Norwood had built over the past 3 years, and she stood there with her fists clenched so tight her nails bit into her palms as the reality crashed over her in waves that left her breathless and hollow. She had woken before dawn as always, ready to feed and water her 23 horses, the beautiful creatures she had raised and trained with patience and care since arriving in Lovelock, Nevada. The corral gate hung open, swinging lazily in the morning breeze. Every single horse was gone. Not stolen in the night by silent thieves, but taken legally, or so the paper nailed to her fence post claimed. 3 men had come with a bill of sale she had supposedly signed, transferring ownership of her entire stock for a pittance of their worth. The signature looked enough like hers to fool anyone who did not know better, and the local sheriff had already told her there was nothing he could do without proof of forgery. Katherine was 24 years old, and she had survived things that would have broken most people. She had survived losing her parents to cholera when she was 19. She had survived the long journey west with nothing but a wagon and determination. She had survived the sneers and doubts of men who thought a woman had no business trading horses. But this felt different. This felt like the earth crumbling beneath her feet. She walked back to her small cabin, her boots stirring up little eddies of dirt with each step. The morning sun was climbing higher, painting the Nevada landscape in shades of gold and amber, but she barely noticed. Inside, she pulled out the fraudulent bill of sale again, studying the names signed at the bottom. Marcus Vance, Thomas Ridley, Cole Hutchins. She did not recognize any of them, but she memorized every letter, every curve of their signatures. Katherine was not the sort of woman who cried easily, but her eyes burned as she sat at her rough-hewn table. 3 years of work gone. Her horses had been her livelihood, her purpose, her pride. Without them, she had nothing. The small amount of money she had saved would last maybe 2 months if she was careful. After that, she would be destitute. A knock at her door made her lift her head. She was not expecting anyone, and for a moment, she considered not answering. But survival in the West meant dealing with whatever came your way, so she stood and opened the door. The man on her porch was tall, with dark hair that fell to his collar and eyes the color of storm clouds. He wore dusty riding clothes, and a hat he removed as soon as he saw her, revealing a face that was weathered by sun and wind, but could not have been much older than 30. There was something in his expression that was neither pity nor curiosity, just a straightforward assessment that made her straighten her spine. "Miss Norwood?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. "Yes," she said, her tone wary. "My name is Xavier Nichols. I am a ranch hand from the Double J spread about 30 miles south of here. I came to look at a mare you had advertised for sale, but I see your corrals are empty." The advertisement. She had posted it in town 2 weeks ago, hoping to sell one of her trained horses to a good home. That felt like a lifetime ago now. "They are gone," Katherine said flatly. "All of them." Xavier's brow furrowed. "All 23 horses. You sold them." "No, I was swindled." The word tasted bitter. 3 men came with forged papers claiming I sold them my entire stock. By the time I realized what happened, they were gone. She did not know why she was telling this stranger her troubles. Perhaps it was because he was the first person who had looked at her like she might have a legitimate grievance, instead of like she was a foolish woman who had gotten what she deserved for trying to run a business alone. Xavier was quiet for a moment, turning his hat in his hands. Then he said, "Do you know which direction they went?" "North, according to the sheriff." But he would not pursue them, said the paperwork looked legal enough. "May I see the papers?" Katherine hesitated, then stepped back to let him in. Her cabin was small but tidy, with a wood stove, a narrow bed, a table, and a few shelves holding her meager possessions. She handed him the bill of sale, and he studied it with careful attention. "This is decent forgery work," Xavier said after a minute. "But look here at the date. It is dated 3 days ago, but the ink is too fresh. And this seal is supposed to be from the land office in Carson City, but the stamp is slightly off. I have seen enough legal documents to know." Hope flickered in Catherine's chest. "Then it is proof of fraud." "It is proof to anyone willing to look closely enough. The problem is getting someone with authority to care." Xavier handed the paper back to her. "These names, Vance, Ridley, and Hutchins, I have heard of them. They are known for this kind of scheme. They move through different territories, swindling people out of livestock and land, then disappearing before anyone can mount a proper pursuit." "You know them." Catherine's heart beat faster. "I know of them. They worked a similar scheme near Carson City last year, took a rancher's entire herd of cattle. By the time the law got involved, they had already sold the cattle and moved on." Xavier's jaw tightened. "The rancher lost everything." Catherine sat down heavily. "Then there is no point. If the law would not help him, they will not help me." The law would not help him because he waited. He tried to work through proper channels, and by the time those channels ground through their process, the trail was cold. Xavier pulled out a chair and sat across from her, his gray eyes serious. "But if someone went after them immediately, tracked them down before they can sell your horses, that would be different." "Someone like you?" Catherine asked, not daring to hope. "Someone like us," Xavier corrected. "They are your horses. You would know them on sight, know their markings and temperaments. You would need to be there to reclaim them." Catherine stared at him. "You are offering to help me track down 3 criminals across Nevada." "I am offering to help you get your property back, yes." "Why?" The question came out sharper than she intended. "You do not know me. You came here to buy a horse, not to involve yourself in someone else's troubles." Xavier was quiet for a moment, and something flickered across his face, an old pain that he quickly shuddered. 5 years ago, my family had a ranch in Texas. My father built it from nothing, spent his whole life on that land. Then a man with false documents and a crooked judge took it from us. My father died 6 months later. I know what it is like to lose everything to men who profit from other people's trust." He met her eyes. "And I know what it is like to wish someone had been willing to help." The cabin fell silent except for the ticking of the clock on the shelf. Catherine studied this stranger, who was offering her something she had not expected. A chance. It was dangerous, probably foolish, and certainly improper for an unmarried woman to go riding off across the territory with a man she had just met. But the alternative was to sit here and accept her loss, to give up on everything she had worked for, and Katherine Norwood had never been good at giving up. "When do we leave?" she asked. Xavier's expression did not change, but she saw approval in his eyes. "Within the hour. Pack light. Bring a bedroll, food for several days, and any weapon you know how to use." Catherine stood and moved to her storage chest. "I have a rifle and a revolver. I can shoot." "Good. We will need to move fast. They have maybe a 6-hour head start, but they will be slowed down by moving that many horses." While Catherine packed, Xavier went to check on his own horse, a sturdy roan gelding tied outside. She worked quickly, her hands steady despite the nerves fluttering in her stomach. She packed dried meat, hardtack, coffee, a change of clothes, and a blanket. Her rifle went into its saddle scabbard, and she strapped the revolver to her hip. She had learned to shoot when she first came west, understanding that a woman alone needed to be able to protect herself. Her own horse, a dependable buckskin mare named Daisy, was in the small barn behind the cabin. Daisy had not been in the corral with the others because Catherine used her for personal riding and kept her close. Now she thanked whatever providence had made her do that. She saddled Daisy quickly, her movements efficient from years of practice. When she emerged leading the mare, Xavier was checking his saddle bags. He looked up and gave her an appraising nod. "You handle your gear like someone who knows how to travel." "I came out here from Missouri 3 years ago. I learned quickly." Katherine swung into the saddle with easy grace. They rode north out of Lovelock, following the road that led toward Winnemucca. Xavier had asked some questions in town before coming to her place, and he had learned that a group of men with a large herd of horses had been seen heading north early that morning. The trail should not be hard to follow, at least at first. The Nevada landscape rolled out before them, sagebrush and scrub stretching toward distant mountains. The sun climbed higher, and the air grew hot. Katherine was grateful for her wide-brimmed hat that shaded her face. Beside her, Xavier rode with the easy posture of someone who spent most of his life in the saddle. "Tell me about the horses," Xavier said after they had been riding for an hour. "I need to know what we are looking for." Katherine felt a pang in her chest, but she began to describe them. "The most valuable is a gray stallion named Sterling. He is 6 years old, fully trained, smart as anything. He has a star on his forehead and one white sock on his left rear leg. Then there is Juniper, a bay mare with a black mane and tail, incredibly gentle, perfect for a family. Copper is a sorrel gelding, fast as the wind. Phoenix is a paint with more personality than any horse I have ever known." She went on, describing each of her 23 horses in detail, their markings, their temperaments, their training. Xavier listened carefully, occasionally asking questions. As she talked, Katherine felt the ache in her chest grow sharper. These were not just animals to her. She had raised many of them from foals, had spent countless hours training them, caring for them, learning their individual personalities. They were her companions in an often lonely life. "You truly care about them," Xavier observed. "They are my family," Katherine said simply. They followed the road north, keeping an eye on the ground for signs of the herd. Around midday, they found clear evidence. The churned earth where many horses had passed, fresh droppings, broken sage branches. The trail veered off the main road onto a smaller track heading northwest. "They are not taking them to Winnemucca," Xavier said, studying the tracks. "This leads toward the mountains. There are several old mining camps in that direction, mostly abandoned now. Good places to lay low or meet with buyers who do not ask questions." "How do you know so much about this area?" Katherine asked. "You said you are from Texas originally." "I have been moving around the last 5 years, working ranches wherever I can find work. I spent 6 months working for a freight company running supplies to the mining camps around here. You learn the territory quickly when your life depends on it." They followed the trail into the afternoon. The landscape grew more rugged, with rocky outcroppings and scrubby pines beginning to appear. Katherine's muscles ached from the steady riding, but she did not complain. Xavier set a pace that was fast but sustainable, and he seemed to have an instinct for when to push and when to let the horses rest. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Xavier called a halt near a small creek that trickled between rocks. "We will water the horses and rest for an hour. If we push too hard now, we will not have anything left when we need it." Katherine dismounted, her legs stiff. She led Daisy to the creek and let the mare drink while she refilled their canteens. Xavier was checking his horse's hooves, making sure the roan had not picked up any stones. "How much farther do you think they are?" Katherine asked. "Hard to say. They stopped here 2, maybe 3 hours ago, judging by these droppings." Xavier pointed to some horse manure near the creek bank. "But they are moving slower than we are. We should catch up to them by tomorrow, maybe sooner if we are lucky. Katherine chewed on a piece of jerky, her mind working. What do we do when we find them? There are 3 of them and 2 of us. We assess the situation first. If they have already sold the horses, we will need to track down the buyers and prove ownership. If they still have them, we will need to be smart about it. Xavier's expression was serious. I will not lie to you, Miss Norwood. This could get dangerous. These men make their living by taking advantage of people, and they would not hesitate to use violence if cornered. Call me Katherine, she said, and I am not afraid of danger. I am afraid of losing everything I worked for and doing nothing about it. Something flickered in Xavier's eyes, respect and something warmer. Katherine, then, and you can call me Xavier. They mounted up again and continued following the trail as the afternoon wore into evening. The tracks remained clear, leading them deeper into the foothills. Katherine found herself watching Xavier as they rode. He moved with a quiet confidence that spoke of experience and capability. His profile against the setting sun was strong, his jaw shadowed with a few days' stubble. There was something about him that made her feel less alone than she had felt in years. As darkness began to fall, Xavier spotted smoke rising in the distance. He held up a hand and they stopped. Could be them, he said quietly. Could be someone else. We need to be careful. They dismounted and led their horses forward on foot, moving quietly through the sage. As they drew closer, Katherine could see firelight and hear voices. Xavier motioned for her to stay back while he crept forward to scout. Katherine waited in the darkness, her heart pounding. Daisy stood quietly beside her, sensing her tension. Minutes stretched out like hours until Xavier returned, his expression grim. It is them, he whispered. I counted 3 men and saw at least a dozen of the horses in a makeshift corral. I could not see all of them in the dark, but Sterling is there. I recognized him from your description. Relief and anger warred in Katherine's chest. What do we do? Nothing tonight. They are armed and alert. We watch, we wait, and we see what they do in the morning. If they move the horses, we follow. If they stay put, we will figure out our approach. Xavier led the way to a spot behind a rocky outcrop about 100 yards from the camp. We will take turns keeping watch. You should try to get some sleep first. Katherine wanted to argue, wanted to ride straight into that camp and demand her horses back, but she knew Xavier was right. Acting rashly would only get them hurt or killed. So she spread out her bedroll behind the rocks and lay down, though she was certain she would not be able to sleep. But exhaustion from the long day caught up with her, and she drifted off despite her anxiety. When she woke, the stars had wheeled overhead and Xavier was sitting nearby, his back against a boulder, watching the distant campfire. Your turn, he said softly when he saw her stir. Wake me if anything changes. He lay down on his own bedroll, and within minutes his breathing had evened into sleep. Katherine took up the watch, her rifle across her knees. The night was cool and clear, the Milky Way a river of light overhead. In the distance, she could see the embers of the Swindler's fire and hear the occasional whinny of her horses. So close, and yet she could not reach them. She studied Xavier's sleeping form in the starlight. He had given up his own plans to help her, a complete stranger. There had to be more to his story, more pain behind that brief mention of his family's lost ranch. She found herself wanting to know more about him, this quiet man with the storm-gray eyes who had appeared on her doorstep like an answer to a prayer she had not known how to voice. Dawn came slowly, the sky lightening to pearl and then to rose. Xavier woke without her needing to rouse him, some internal clock bringing him to alertness. He moved to her side and looked down at the camp below. The 3 men were stirring, building up their fire and making coffee. In the growing light, Katherine could see her horses more clearly now, enclosed in a temporary corral made of rope and wooden stakes. She counted 19 of them, which meant 4 were missing. "They must have sold some already," she whispered, her heart sinking. "Or they are being held somewhere else," Xavier replied. "Let us see what happens." They watched as the men ate breakfast and then began to break camp. Katherine strained to hear their conversation, but they were too far away for words to carry clearly. After about an hour, 2 of the men mounted horses, they looked like 2 of hers, and began to drive the herd northwest along a narrow trail. The 3rd man stayed behind, kicking dirt over the fire and gathering up their gear. "They are splitting up," Xavier murmured. "The 3rd one might be going to meet someone or to check on the other horses." "We should follow the herd," Katherine said. "That is where most of them are." "Agreed, but we need to be careful. If they spot us, this gets complicated fast." They waited until the herd was well ahead, then mounted their horses and began to follow. The trail wound through increasingly rugged country, and Xavier kept them well back, relying on the dust cloud and occasional glimpses to track the herd's progress. Around midday, the trail descended into a narrow canyon. Xavier pulled up short, frowning. "I do not like this. If they are meeting someone in there, we could be riding into an ambush. So what do? We find another way around and see if we can get ahead of them." Xavier studied the terrain, then pointed to a ridge on the eastern side of the canyon. "If we can get up there, we will have a vantage point." They turned off the trail and began to climb. It was hard going, the horses picking their way carefully over loose rock and steep slopes. But Xavier's instinct proved right. From the top of the ridge, they could look down into the canyon and see the trail below. The herd was moving through the canyon, the 2 men driving them from behind. And ahead, Katherine could see where the canyon widened into a box valley with what looked like old ranch buildings. "There," Xavier said, pointing. "That must be where they are taking them." As they watched, the herd reached the valley and several more men emerged from the buildings. Katherine's stomach tightened. "There are more of them." "5 total that I can see," Xavier said grimly. "This is bigger than just 3 swindlers. This is an organized operation." They watched as the horses were driven into a large corral near the buildings. The men gathered, talking and gesturing. Even from this distance, Katherine could sense the self-satisfied air of criminals celebrating a successful score. "We cannot take on 5 men," Katherine said, frustration thick in her voice. "No, we cannot," Xavier agreed. "But now we know where the horses are. We can ride back to Lovelock, get the sheriff, and bring him here with proof." "The sheriff would not help me before, because he did not have proof. Now we know where the horses are and can lead him straight to them. He will not be able to ignore that." Xavier's voice was calm and logical, but Katherine could hear the steel underneath. She wanted to argue, wanted to find some way to get her horses back right now, but she knew he was right. They had found the horses. Now they needed help to reclaim them legally. But as they turned to leave, a voice behind them said, "I would not move if I were you." Katherine's heart stopped. She and Xavier both froze, then slowly turned. The 3rd man from the camp, the one who had stayed behind, stood 10 feet away with a rifle pointed at them. He was a rangy man with a scarred face and cold eyes. "Well now," the man said, his voice carrying a hint of amusement. "What do we have here? Couple of folks taking a mighty strong interest in other people's business." Xavier's hand had drifted toward his gun, but the man shook his head. "Do not even think about it, friend. I have got this rifle aimed right at the lady. You make a move and she dies before you clear leather." Katherine's mind raced. How had he snuck up on them? They had been so focused on watching the valley that they had not heard him approach from behind. "We are just travelers passing through," Xavier said evenly. The man laughed, a harsh sound. That's so. Then why are you watching my associates like a hawk? No, I think you followed us. Question is why? His eyes narrowed as he studied Katherine. Wait, I know you. You are that horse trader from Lovelock. We bought your stock a couple days back. You stole my stock with forged papers, Katherine said, anger overriding fear. Now that is just hurtful. We conducted a legal transaction. The man's grin widened, but I suppose it does not matter much now. You two have seen too much. Marcus and the others are not going to be happy about this. You cannot just murder us, Xavier said. We told people where we were going. If we disappear, they will come looking. It was a lie, and Katherine suspected the man knew it, but doubt flickered across his face. He was silent for a moment, clearly thinking through his options. Tell you what, he finally said. You two are going to walk down into that valley nice and slow. We will let Marcus decide what to do with you. If you are smart and cooperative, maybe you will live through this. If you are stupid, well, there are plenty of places to bury bodies out here that will never be found. He gestured with the rifle, and Katherine and Xavier had no choice but to comply. They walked their horses down a steep trail into the valley, the man following behind with his rifle trained on them the whole way. Katherine's mind was working frantically, trying to think of a way out of this, but with a gun at her back and 5 more men waiting ahead, the options seemed non-existent. As they entered the valley, the other men looked up in surprise. A tall man with a dark beard, presumably Marcus Vance, strode forward with a scowl on his face. Cole, what the hell is this? He demanded. Caught them spying on us from the ridge, Cole replied. She is the horse trader from Lovelock. They followed us. Marcus's expression darkened. He looked Katherine up and down, then turned his attention to Xavier. You are making a big mistake, friend. You should have minded your own business. Those are her horses, Xavier said calmly. You stole them with forged papers. We want them back. Want them back. Marcus laughed, and the other men joined in. That is rich. You rode all the way out here, the two of you, to take on all of us and reclaim some horses. He shook his head. That is either the bravest or stupidest thing I have ever heard. Probably both, one of the other men offered, and they laughed again. Katherine's hand was still near her revolver, but there were too many of them, and they were all armed. Any move she made would be suicide. Marcus seemed to read her thoughts. Thomas, disarm them. A short, stocky man stepped forward and relieved Katherine and Xavier of their weapons. Katherine felt naked without the reassuring weight of her gun on her hip. Now then, Marcus said, crossing his arms. We have got ourselves a situation. You two know too much. We have got a good operation going here, and we cannot have you running back to Lovelock telling tales. So what are you going to do? Katherine demanded, forcing her voice to stay steady. Murder us in cold blood. Murder is such an ugly word, Marcus replied. Let us just say we will make sure you cannot cause us problems. He turned to his men. Tie them up and put them in the old bunkhouse. We will decide what to do with them after we finish the business with the buyer tomorrow. Katherine and Xavier were roughly grabbed and their hands bound behind their backs with rope. They were shoved toward one of the dilapidated buildings, an old bunkhouse with broken windows and a sagging door. Inside, it was dim and dusty, with a few rotting bunks and not much else. They were pushed down onto the floor, and their ankles were tied as well. Enjoy your stay, Cole said with a nasty grin before slamming the door shut. Katherine heard something heavy being dragged in front of it, barricading them inside. They sat in the dim light filtering through the broken windows, and for a moment neither spoke. Then Xavier said quietly, I am sorry, I should have been more alert. I did not hear him coming. Neither did I, Katherine said. This is not your fault. We are in serious trouble here. Xavier tested the ropes around his wrists, but whoever tied them knew what they were doing. The bonds were tight and secure. "They are going to kill us, are they not?" Katherine said it as a statement, not a question. Xavier was silent for a moment. "They are going to try," he finally said. "But I will be damned if I let that happen without a fight." Katherine looked at him in the dimness. Even tied up and trapped, there was a determined set to his jaw, a refusal to give up that kindled something in her own chest. "So what do we do?" "We get out of these ropes, we find our weapons, and we get your horses back." Xavier said it like it was the simplest thing in the world. Despite their dire situation, Katherine felt a smile tug at her lips. "You make it sound easy." Easy and possible are two different things. Xavier shifted, trying to find a more comfortable position. "There is a nail sticking out of this bunk frame behind me. If I can get the rope against it, I might be able to saw through the bindings." It took him almost an hour of patient, painful work, but eventually the rope around his wrists frayed and snapped. He quickly untied his ankles, then moved to free Katherine. As the ropes fell away, she rubbed her chafed wrists, wincing. "Now what?" she whispered. "They barricaded the door." Xavier moved to examine the windows. They were small and high up, but not impossibly so. "Think you can squeeze through one of these?" Katherine looked at the narrow opening. "I can try." Xavier boosted her up, and Katherine wiggled through the window, dropping to the ground outside with a soft thud. She held her breath, waiting to see if anyone had heard, but the camp remained quiet. She could hear voices from one of the other buildings and see firelight through the windows. Moving carefully, she found something to shift away from the door and pulled it open enough for Xavier to slip out. They crouched in the shadows, assessing the situation. "Our weapons are probably in that main building," Xavier breathed in her ear. "And the horses are in the corral on the other side." "We need the weapons first," Katherine replied. They moved like ghosts through the darkness, keeping to the shadows of the buildings. The main structure appeared to be an old ranch house, and through the window, Katherine could see the 5 men inside, sitting around a table playing cards and drinking. Her rifle and Xavier's gun belt were hanging on pegs near the door. "Wait here," Xavier whispered, and before Katherine could protest, he had slipped around to the door. She watched with her heart in her throat as he eased it open, the hinges mercifully silent. He reached in and grabbed the weapons, then froze as one of the men stood up. Katherine's breath stopped. For a long moment, Xavier was perfectly still. The man stretched, yawned, and sat back down without turning toward the door. Xavier backed out, easing the door closed, and returned to Katherine's side. She nearly sagged with relief as he handed her the rifle and strapped on his own gun belt. Now at least they had a chance. They made their way to the corral where her horses were kept. The animals stirred at their approach, and Sterling, her gray stallion, came to the fence and whickered softly. Katherine reached out to stroke his nose, emotion welling up in her chest. "I missed you too, boy," she whispered. "Can you handle them if we let them out?" Xavier asked quietly. "Sterling will follow me and the others will follow him," Katherine confirmed. "But where is Daisy and your horse?" They found their mounts tied near another shed. Xavier cut them loose and brought them back. "We are going to have to move fast and quiet. Once we get the herd moving, they will hear us, and all hell will break loose." Katherine nodded, her heart pounding. Xavier opened the corral gate and she whistled softly to Sterling. The stallion came immediately, and true to her word, the other horses began to follow. They moved the herd out of the corral and started them up the trail leading out of the valley. For a few precious minutes, everything went according to plan. The horses moved quietly and the camp behind them remained undisturbed. But then one of the horses, nervous in the darkness, whinnied loudly. Immediately, shouts erupted from the ranch house. "Ride!" Xavier yelled, and Katherine did not need to be told twice. She kicked Daisy into a gallop, and Sterling kept pace beside her, the other horses running behind. Xavier rode on the other side of the herd, keeping them together and moving forward. Gunshots cracked through the night, and Katherine heard bullets whining past. She leaned low over Daisy's neck, urging the mare faster. The trail was treacherous in the darkness, but stopping meant capture or death. Behind them, she could hear the thunder of pursuit. The swindlers had mounted quickly and were coming after them. More shots rang out closer now. Katherine risked a glance back and saw 3 riders gaining on them. The trail climbed out of the valley, narrow and steep. Some of her horses were struggling with the grade, slowing the whole group down. Xavier must have realized it too, because he suddenly wheeled his roan around and charged back toward their pursuers. "Xavier, no!" Katherine screamed, but he was already gone. She heard more gunshots, shouting, and then a horse's terrified squeal. Katherine wanted desperately to turn back to help him, but she had to keep the horses moving. If she stopped now, they would lose everything. The herd reached the top of the trail and spilled out onto more level ground. Katherine drove them forward, her ears straining for sounds behind her. Minutes passed like hours, and then she heard hoofbeats. She turned, her rifle already coming up, then lowered it as Xavier appeared out of the darkness on his roan. "Keep going," he shouted. "I slowed them down, but they are still coming." They rode hard through the night, pushing the horses as fast as they dared. Katherine had no idea where they were going, only that they needed to put distance between themselves and the swindlers. Xavier seemed to have a direction in mind, though, and she followed his lead. As dawn began to break, Xavier led them into a narrow canyon with steep walls and a small spring. "We will fort up here," he said. "The canyon has only one entrance, and we can defend it." Katherine was exhausted, her whole body aching, but she helped him position rocks and deadfall to create a barrier across the canyon entrance. The horses milled behind them, nervous but safe for the moment. "Did you kill any of them?" Katherine asked as they worked. "No. I shot one man's horse out from under him and fired enough rounds to make the others take cover. That bought us time, but they are angry now." Xavier checked his ammunition. "I have maybe a dozen rounds left. You?" "About the same for the rifle, a few more for my revolver." They had just finished their makeshift barricade when the swindlers appeared at the canyon entrance. Katherine counted 4 men, which meant they had left one behind, probably the man whose horse had been shot. Marcus Vance sat on his horse at the front, his face dark with fury. "You two have been a thorn in my side long enough," he shouted. "Give us back the horses and we will let you ride out of here alive." "Like hell you will," Xavier called back. "Those horses belong to Miss Norwood and she is keeping them." "This is your last chance," Marcus warned. "We can wait you out. You cannot have much water in there, and we have all the time in the world." Xavier looked at Katherine. "He is not wrong. We have the spring, so water is not the problem. But we cannot stay here forever, and eventually they will find a way around or over those canyon walls." Katherine's mind worked quickly. "Then we need to change the situation. What if we do not wait for them to come to us?" "What are you thinking?" "I am thinking they expect us to hide and defend. What if we attack instead?" Xavier studied her for a moment, then a slow smile crossed his face. "You are full of surprises, Katherine Norwood." They spent the next few minutes planning. It was risky, perhaps even foolish, but sitting here waiting to be picked off seemed worse. The canyon had a narrow cleft in the eastern wall, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. Xavier had spotted it while they were setting up the barricade. If they could get through that cleft, they could circle around behind the swindlers. "You stay here with the horses," Xavier said. "I will go through the cleft." "Absolutely not," Katherine replied firmly. "We do this together, or we do not do it at all." Xavier looked like he wanted to argue, but something in her expression stopped him. "You are going to be the death of me, woman. Not if those men out there do it first. Come on." They left the horses and squeezed through the narrow cleft. It was a tight fit, and Katherine had to turn sideways in places, but they made it through to the other side. Moving carefully, they worked their way around the canyon walls, using rocks and scrub for cover. The four swindlers were focused on the canyon entrance, discussing how to approach the barricade. They had dismounted and left their horses a short distance back. Katherine and Xavier crept closer, weapons ready. When they were as close as they could get without being seen, Xavier caught Katherine's eye and counted down with his fingers. 3, 2, 1. They stepped out from cover with guns raised. "Drop your weapons," Xavier ordered, his voice like iron. The four men spun around in shock. For a moment, everything hung in balance, and Katherine saw Marcus Vance calculating whether he could draw his gun fast enough. His hand twitched toward his holster. "Do not," Katherine said, her rifle steady on him. "I am tired, angry, and I have nothing left to lose. I will shoot you without hesitation." Marcus must have believed her because his hand slowly moved away from his gun. "Drop them," he said to his men, defeat in his voice. One by one, the swindlers unbuckled their gun belts and let them fall. Xavier moved forward quickly and kicked the weapons away, then gestured for the men to move away from them. "On your knees, hands on your heads." The men complied, and Katherine felt a wave of relief so strong she almost staggered. They had done it. Against all odds, they had won. Now what? Katherine asked. "Now we tie them up and take them back to Lovelock to face justice," Xavier said. "Along with your horses." Using the men's own ropes, they bound the swindlers securely. Marcus glared at them with impotent rage. "You think you have won? Even if you take us to the law, we will be out in a month. We have connections, money to pay for lawyers. You have not won anything." "Maybe," Katherine said, "but you do not have my horses anymore, and that is enough for now." They loaded the bound men onto their horses, tying them to their saddles. Then they retrieved Katherine's herd from the canyon and began the long journey back to Lovelock. It took 2 full days of travel, stopping only to rest the horses and let the prisoners relieve themselves under careful guard. When they finally rode into Lovelock with 19 horses and 4 bound criminals, the entire town came out to stare. The sheriff, a portly man named Daniels, looked like he wanted to sink into the ground. "Miss Norwood," he said weakly, "you are back." "With my horses and the men who stole them," Katherine replied coolly. "Along with evidence of their forgery and theft." The story came out quickly. Faced with overwhelming evidence and the testimony of both Katherine and Xavier, Sheriff Daniels had no choice but to arrest Marcus Vance and his accomplices. Katherine also told him about the 5th man still at the Box Canyon Valley, and the sheriff promised to send a deputy to collect him. The forged bill of sale was examined by the county judge, who confirmed it was indeed a forgery. The 3 men were charged with fraud, theft, and attempted murder. The trial would happen in a few weeks, but for now they were securely locked in the Lovelock jail. As for Katherine's horses, she had 19 of them back. The other 4, it turned out, had been sold to a rancher 2 days before Katherine and Xavier caught up with the thieves. Xavier suggested they contact the rancher, explain the situation, and see if he would be willing to return them for the price he paid. It was not ideal, but it was something. With the immediate crisis resolved, Katherine found herself standing in front of her corral once more, watching her horses graze peacefully. It felt like a dream, like none of the past few days had actually happened. But the soreness in her muscles and the rope burns on her wrists told her it was all too real. "You did it," a voice said behind her. She turned to find Xavier approaching, his hat in his hands. You got them back. We did it, Katherine corrected. I could never have done this without you. Xavier shrugged, looking uncomfortable with the praise. I just helped you do what you were determined to do anyway. They stood in awkward silence for a moment. Now that the crisis was over, Katherine was acutely aware that Xavier had no reason to stay. He had come to Lovelock to buy a horse, had ended up on a days-long pursuit across Nevada, and had risked his life to help her. His obligation, if he had ever had one, was fulfilled. I suppose you will be heading back to the Double J Ranch now, Katherine said, trying to keep her voice neutral. Xavier turned his hat in his hands, not meeting her eyes. Actually, I have been thinking. That rancher who bought your 4 horses, he is on the way back south. I could stop by, talk to him, see if we can work something out. You have already done so much, Katherine protested. I cannot ask you to do more. You are not asking, I am offering. Xavier finally looked at her, and there was something in his gray eyes that made her heart skip. Besides, I never did get to buy that mare I came here for. Maybe we could talk about that when I get back. When I get back. Not if. When Katherine felt warmth spread through her chest. I think we could talk about that. Xavier smiled, a real smile that transformed his face from merely handsome to something that made Katherine's breath catch. Then I will see you in a week or so. He rode out the next morning, and Katherine watched him go with a mixture of emotions she could not quite name. The days that followed were busy. She had her horses to care for, townspeople to talk to, and the approaching trial to prepare for. But through it all, she found her thoughts drifting to Xavier Nichols, to his quiet strength and unexpected kindness, to the way he had appeared in her life exactly when she needed someone most. True to his word, Xavier returned a week later, and he was not alone. He was leading 4 horses, and Katherine recognized them immediately. Sterling's daughter Sage, the young paint gelding Flint, and the matched bays River and Rain. All 4 of her missing horses returned. Katherine ran out to meet him, her heart soaring. You got them. How? Xavier dismounted, grinning. The rancher turned out to be a decent man. When I explained the situation and showed him the newspaper article about the trial, he agreed to return them. He would not even take his money back. Said any woman brave enough to track down thieves across Nevada deserved to have her horses returned. Katherine was so overwhelmed she did not think, just threw her arms around Xavier in a fierce hug. He stiffened in surprise, then his arms came around her, holding her close. She could feel the steady beat of his heart, smell the scent of leather and sage that clung to him. When she pulled back, embarrassed by her outburst, Xavier was looking at her with an expression that made her pulse race. Katherine, he said, his voice rough, I need to tell you something. What is it? When I rode away from here last week, I thought it would be easy. I would fetch your horses, bring them back, and then return to the Double J. But the whole time I was gone, all I could think about was you. About your courage, your determination, the way you refused to give up even when everything seemed lost. He took a breath. I know we barely know each other. I know this is probably too soon. But I have not felt this way about anyone since before my family lost the ranch, since before I started drifting. You make me want to stop drifting. Katherine's heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear her own thoughts. What are you saying? I am saying I would like permission to court you if you are willing. I am saying I want to stay in Lovelock, find work nearby, and see where this might go. Xavier's gray eyes were intense, vulnerable in a way she had not seen before. I am saying I think I am falling in love with you, Katherine Norwood. The world seemed to hold its breath. Katherine looked at this man who had ridden into her life as a stranger and become something so much more. He had believed her when no one else would. He had risked everything to help her. And somewhere along the trail, in the danger and the fear and the determination, she had fallen for him too. Yes, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Yes to all of it. Xavier's smile was like sunrise. He took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against hers, and lifted it to his lips. The kiss he pressed to her knuckles was soft and reverent, and it sent shivers through her entire body. The trial happened 2 weeks later, and it was a sensation. The whole town packed into the courthouse to hear the testimony. Katherine told her story, Xavier corroborated it, and the forged documents were entered as evidence. Marcus Vance and his accomplices tried to defend themselves, but their lies crumbled under scrutiny. The jury deliberated for less than an hour before finding all 4 men guilty. Marcus Vance was sentenced to 10 years in prison for fraud, theft, and attempted murder. Thomas Ridley and Cole Hutchins received 8 years each. The 5th man, arrested at the Box Canyon, turned out to be wanted for similar crimes in California and was extradited to face those charges as well. Justice, Katherine thought as she watched them being led away in chains, was a beautiful thing. With the trial behind her, Katherine threw herself into rebuilding her horse trading business. She had all 23 of her horses back, and word of her adventure had spread throughout the region. People came from miles around to meet the woman who had tracked down the thieves and reclaimed her stock. Her reputation as someone who trained quality horses and could not be cheated helped business flourish in a way it never had before. And through it all, Xavier was there. He found work at a nearby ranch, close enough to ride over to Katherine's place most evenings. They would sit on her porch as the sun set over the Nevada desert, talking about everything and nothing. She learned more about his past, about the pain of losing his family's ranch, and the years of aimless wandering that followed. He learned about her journey west after her parents died, about the loneliness of building a life alone, about the joy she found in working with horses. The courtship was not always smooth. They were both independent people, used to making their own decisions and not having to consider anyone else. They had disagreements about how to train a particularly stubborn young colt, about whether Katherine should expand her business or keep it manageable, about a dozen other small things. But they learned to talk through their differences, to compromise, to appreciate the ways their strengths complemented each other. 6 months after that day, Xavier first appeared on her doorstep. He asked her to marry him. It was not a fancy proposal, no down-on-one-knee declaration in front of witnesses. They were out riding, checking the boundary fences on her property, when he pulled his horse to a stop and said, "I want to spend the rest of my life with you, Katherine. Will you marry me?" She looked at him sitting there on his roan horse, the Nevada sun painting him in gold, and her answer was the easiest thing she had ever said. Yes, they were married in the small church in Lovelock on a bright autumn day in 1883. Half the town attended, along with some of the ranchers and traders Katherine had done business with over the years. The rancher who had returned her 4 horses came and gave Katherine away, since she had no family of her own. Xavier's boss from the Double J Ranch stood up as his best man. Katherine wore a simple white dress she had made herself, with lace at the collar and cuffs. Xavier wore a new suit that he had bought specially for the occasion, though he looked uncomfortable in the starched shirt and tie. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Xavier kissed her with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. The reception was held in the town hall, with fiddle music and dancing and more food than they could possibly eat. Katherine danced with her new husband until her feet ached, laughing more than she had in years. This man who had started as a stranger had become her partner, her love, her future. They spent their wedding night in Katherine's cabin, which was now their cabin. Xavier carried her over the threshold, a tradition he insisted on despite Katherine's protests that it was silly. Inside, with the door closed against the world, They came together with a passion that had been building for months. Xavier was gentle and patient, making sure Katherine felt cherished and safe. She had been nervous, having never been with a man before, but Xavier made it beautiful. His hands on her skin were reverent, his kisses deep and consuming. When they finally joined together, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Two pieces that had been searching and finally found their fit. Afterward, they lay tangled in the sheets, Katherine's head on Xavier's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Xavier replied, his arms tightening around her. "More than I ever thought I could love anyone." Life settled into a new rhythm. Xavier left the Double J Ranch and became Katherine's partner in the horse trading business. It turned out he had a real gift for training horses, and together they built a reputation as the best in the region. People came from as far as California and Utah to buy their horses, knowing they were getting animals that were not only well-bred but also well-trained and reliable. They expanded the cabin, adding a proper bedroom and a larger kitchen. Xavier built new corrals and a bigger barn. Katherine planted a garden and they got chickens for fresh eggs. It was not a grand life, but it was theirs, built with their own hands and filled with love. 2 years after they married, Katherine discovered she was pregnant. She told Xavier one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, and she had never seen such pure joy on his face. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing like a child. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "We are going to be parents." The pregnancy was not easy. Katherine suffered from terrible morning sickness in the first months, and as she grew larger, the physical demands of working with horses became difficult. But Xavier was there every step of the way, taking on more of the physical labor and fussing over her in a way that was both annoying and endearing. Their son was born on a cold January morning in 1886. The labor was long and painful, but when the midwife finally placed the squalling infant in Katherine's arms, every moment of discomfort was forgotten. He had a shock of dark hair like his father and lungs that could wake the dead. "What should we name him?" Xavier asked, his voice thick with emotion as he gazed at his son. "James," Katherine said without hesitation, "after your father." Xavier's eyes filled with tears. His father had been dead for years, but the loss still ached. Naming their son after him was Katherine's way of honoring the man who had raised Xavier, the man whose stolen ranch had set in motion the chain of events that eventually brought Xavier to her doorstep. "James Nichols," Xavier said, testing the name. "It is perfect." Little James was a healthy, happy baby who grew into a curious toddler. Katherine and Xavier balanced parenting with running their business, sometimes strapping James to one of their backs while they worked. As he grew older, James showed a natural affinity for horses, toddling fearlessly up to animals 10 times his size and patting their noses with chubby hands. When James was 3, Katherine became pregnant again. This time she knew what to expect, and the pregnancy seemed easier. Their daughter was born on a warm summer evening in 1889, a tiny thing with Katherine's auburn hair and Xavier's gray eyes. They named her Eleanor, after Katherine's mother. Eleanor was a gentler child than her boisterous brother, content to sit and watch the world around her with solemn eyes. But she had a stubborn streak a mile wide, something both her parents recognized as coming from Katherine's side of the family. The years passed in a blur of joy and hard work. The horse trading business continued to thrive. James and Eleanor grew, learning to ride almost before they could walk, helping with the horses and developing their own relationships with the animals. The little homestead that Katherine had built alone became a proper ranch, known throughout Nevada for quality horses and honest dealing. Katherine often thought back to that terrible morning when she had found her corrals empty, when it seemed like everything she had worked for was gone. If that had not happened, Xavier never would have come into her life. She would still be alone, successful perhaps, but without the love and family that now filled her days. Sometimes at night, lying in bed next to Xavier with their children asleep in the next room, she would trace the scar on his shoulder from a bullet that had grazed him during their pursuit of the thieves. He had other scars too, marks from the hard life he had lived before finding her. She had her own scars, visible and invisible, from loss and loneliness, and the struggle to build something from nothing. But they had found each other, two damaged souls who had somehow made each other whole. It was not a fairy tale romance. It was better, something real and tested and proven through hardship. "What are you thinking about?" Xavier asked one night, catching her tracing the lines of his face in the moonlight. "How lucky I am," Katherine said simply. "How everything that seemed terrible at the time led me to you." Xavier caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "I am the lucky one. You gave me a reason to stop running, a place to call home." "We gave each other that," Katherine corrected. "Home is not a place, Xavier. It is us. It is this family we built." He pulled her close, and she rested her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. Outside, the Nevada wind whispered through the sage, and somewhere in the distance, one of their horses whinnied softly. It was the sound of peace, of contentment, of a life well lived. Katherine had been 24 years old and desperate when 3 men swindled her out of everything she owned. She had been 24 when a stranger with storm-gray eyes offered to help her track down every one of those stolen horses. She had been 24 when she fell in love on a desperate chase across the wild Nevada landscape. Now she was 31, a wife and mother and successful businesswoman, lying in the arms of the man who had helped her reclaim not just her horses but her whole life. The journey had been dangerous and difficult, but she would not change a single moment of it, because sometimes the worst thing that ever happened to you was really the best thing in disguise. Sometimes losing everything meant finding something better. And sometimes a stranger appeared on your doorstep exactly when you needed him most, and that stranger became your forever. 2 more children followed in the years after Alina. Another son they named Thomas, and a daughter called Grace. The ranch expanded, the business flourished, and the Nichols family became a fixture in Lovelock and the surrounding territory. Xavier and Katherine worked side by side every day, partners in business and in life, their love deepening with each passing year. When James was 16, he took over much of the day-to-day training, showing his father's gift with horses. Alina, at 13, proved to have a head for business, keeping the books and corresponding with buyers. Thomas, 10 years old, was the wild one, always getting into mischief but with a heart of gold. And little Grace, just 7, was the charmer who could wrap anyone around her finger with a smile. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Xavier took Katherine up to the ridge where they had first spotted the box canyon where her stolen horses had been held. It was a warm spring day, the desert blooming with wildflowers after a wet winter. "Why did you bring me here?" Katherine asked, though she suspected she knew. "Because this is where I knew for certain I was in love with you," Xavier said. "We were trapped, outnumbered, probably going to die, and all I could think was how much I wished I had more time with you. How much I wanted to know everything about you, spend every day with you, grow old with you." He took her hands in his. "I got my wish. 20 years married, and I still want more time with you. I still want forever." Katherine's eyes filled with happy tears. "You have forever, Xavier Nichols. For as long as we both shall live." He kissed her there on the ridge, with the Nevada sun warm on their faces and 20 years of love and partnership between them. When they pulled apart, Katherine looked out over the landscape, the same view she had seen that desperate day when everything seemed hopeless. From this vantage point, she could see Lovelock in the distance, and beyond it, the land where their ranch now stood. She could see the life they had built together, the family they had raised, the legacy they were creating. All of it had started with loss, with theft, with a desperate pursuit across the wild country. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" Xavier asked. "For knocking on my door that morning. For believing me. For helping me when you had no reason to. For loving me." Xavier smiled, that same smile that still made her heart skip after all these years. "Katherine, helping you that day was the best decision I ever made. You gave me back my life, gave me a reason to stop drifting and put down roots. I should be thanking you." "Then we are even," Katherine said, leaning into his embrace. They stood there together for a long time, two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built something beautiful from the ashes of loss. The Wild West was changing, becoming more civilized with each passing year, but some things remained constant. Love. Family. The bond between two souls who had found their match. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Xavier and Katherine mounted their horses and rode back toward home. Back to their children, their ranch, their life. Back to the forever they had found in each other's arms. And if sometimes, on quiet evenings, they told their children and grandchildren the story of how they met, of stolen horses and a desperate chase, of danger and determination and love found in the most unlikely circumstances, well, that was their privilege. It was a good story, a true story, and it had a very happy ending. The legacy of that chase lived on. Years later, when Katherine was an old woman with silver in her auburn hair, still running the ranch alongside her children and grandchildren, people would still come from far and wide to buy horses from the Nichols family. They came because of the quality of the animals, yes, but also because of the story. The story of the woman who would not give up, and the cowboy who helped her track down every stolen horse, and how they fell in love along the way. It became a legend in its own right, told and retold across Nevada and beyond. Some versions exaggerated the details, adding dramatic gunfights and daring escapes that never happened, but the heart of the story remained true. Two people brought together by injustice, bound together by determination, and united forever by love. Katherine died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 73. Xavier holding her hand just as he had held it on their wedding day 42 years earlier. He followed her 6 months later, unable to imagine a world without her in it. They were buried side by side in the Lovelock Cemetery, under a headstone that read simply Katherine and Xavier Nichols, together forever. Their children and grandchildren continued running the ranch, training horses with the same care and integrity their parents had taught them. The Nichols name became synonymous with quality and honesty in the horse trading business, a reputation that lasted for generations. But more than the business, more than the legacy of fine horses, what Katherine and Xavier left behind was the story of their love. A love born from crisis, forged through danger, and proven through nearly half a century of partnership. A love that showed how sometimes the worst moment of your life could lead to the best thing that ever happened to you. And on quiet evenings, when the Nevada sun set over the desert and painted the sky in shades of gold, people said you could still see two riders on the ridge above the old box canyon. Just a glimpse, just for a moment. A man and a woman, riding side by side, forever chasing their stolen horses and finding their way back to each other, because some loves are strong enough to echo through time. Some bonds are too powerful to be broken, even by death. And some stories deserve to be told and retold, a reminder that courage and determination and love can overcome any obstacle, can turn loss into gain, can transform strangers into soulmates. Katherine and Xavier's story was one of those. A Wild West romance, true and tested, that proved love could be found in the most unexpected places, could bloom in the harshest circumstances, and could last beyond a lifetime. It was a story of justice and determination, of horses reclaimed and hearts won, of two people who found exactly what they needed in each other. And they all lived happily ever after, in the truest and most meaningful sense of those timeless words.